Water is at the heart and history of Tone Works. Just over 250 years ago, the earliest members of what became the Fox Brothers textile family set up shop on the banks of the River Tone on the northern edge of Wellington. As the business grew, water wheels gave way to steam and then electricity. But the clear, soft water from the river remained essential for dyeing and wet finishing the woolen cloth. Many hundreds of people once worked here, but by the 1980s, the British textile industry was in decline. The Fox Brothers business was shrinking, and Tone Works had become an empty shell, although filled with some unique industrial machinery. In 2020, Somerset West and Taunton Council bought the site with financial help from Historic England, and discussions began about its future.
Oh, it could be amazing.
We wanted to see it come alive.
Sort of treasure trove of industrial archaeology, really.
I'm Caitlin de Silvey, and I'm a senior lecturer in environmental social science here at the ESI. Well, my background is in cultural geography, and what I study is people's relationships to places and also to objects. I'm interested in how they relate to those things when they're changing, so environmental change or ruined buildings, things that are in the process of going from one state to another. I'm interested in studying that kind of change. Some of the kinds of places that I study are things like Cornish harbours that are threatened with sea level rise and may have to be abandoned or decommissioned. But I also work in heritage contexts, so I look at heritage sites where we might be stretched to have the resources to maintain them in perpetuity and try to think about how we might interpret their change rather than trying to keep them permanently present.
Tone Works was in a pretty bad way when the council acquired the site. The roofs were no longer watertight, but an even bigger problem lurked unseen, with large amounts of asbestos and other contamination that had to be removed. Claire Fear worked with specialist contractors for months before the works was even safe enough to enter without wearing hazmat suits. It gave the architect a chance to think about the possibilities of something called Curated Decay.
The benefits of the approach of curated decay at Tone Works may well be the kind of retention of part of the romance and wonder that people currently feel when they go into the building. So rather than reinstating it, requiring or giving it alternative use, which may require some of the machines to be removed, actually freezing it, allowing some areas to decay, allowing there's one tree in there which it's blossoming at the moment, bless it, it's keeping going, allowing that romanticism that we all associate with follies and ruins to be retained and reclaimed at that site would be wonderful. There are clear buildings there which can be used for alternative use very easily, so I think it's a balance that we could achieve on that site.
There's no money for the site to become an industrial museum, but a solution has to be found. Professor Caitlin de Silvey is thinking about it.
I visited Tone Works with Claire Fear and Vanessa Rulig from Thread in June 2021 and was very taken by the place. And I think what struck me most was the way in which it had been colonized by not only sort of plants and mosses and trees in certain cases, but the sense of the layers of history that were left in place there as well, and the way that there was still fabrics wrapped around some of the machines. And it felt very much, that titillating sense of something that's just been left. Someone walked away from it and left it in the middle of a job. And so I think at that particular place, I think the challenge, if you were going to think about applying a curated decay approach there, the challenge is trying to hold some of that sense of that magic while making it safe and making it possible to reuse elements of it. I mean, I think some of the photographs that I took of it, I was just looking back at and thinking about things like, there's a tree growing up near a support. It looks like it's in a winter garden, and would it be possible to leave that tree there and actually work around it and stabilize the building so that the tree is allowed to grow there? Because I think things like trees in a curated decay approach are basically, living clocks that tell you, oh, this was, this tree germinated, in the moment when the works were abandoned, and the operations ceased. And so I think holding on to those elements of natural history that tell you about the cultural history of the place is quite important. And I think other elements of that site that, that could benefit from thinking with curated decay is perhaps trying to understand and interpret a little bit more about what materials the different machines were made out of. What kind of wood is that in the machines, and why is it supporting certain kinds of mosses and ferns, rather than others? And the amazing teasel machine that has that natural matter of the little teasel heads in there as part of the carding device. And so for me, I think when you start to think about curated decay, it's actually having the expertise to recognize, what are the ecologies that have emerged in this place? What do they tell us about the history of this place, as well as about what it might become in the future? And just being comfortable with allowing that ambiguity to be sustained, rather than trying to make a clear distinction between the natural and the cultural elements of a place. But I think it will require very careful handling, because in any other place, if you want to invite people in, you need to make sure the roof isn't going to fall on their head.
Some buildings on the site are in reasonably good repair. Nikki Saunter thinks they have great potential for new uses.
We always saw this as being almost like a village within a town, a community in itself that adds to the community and enables the wider community to grow and to flourish. And I think in real terms, I think this will always have a mixed use. So I see there'll be some parts of this site that will be commercial and sort of straightforwardly commercial, small units maybe for creative businesses. I think this site lends itself very well to, say, showing films, having dance in these amazing spaces, having exhibitions. It could also be used for renting out to film companies and using the actual site itself as a location, as a beautiful backdrop. And of course you could have restaurants, eating places in and out of this sort of semi-curated decay space, which will be quite unique, I think.
Hopefully it won't be too long before the buildings at Toneworks are safe to enter and more people from Wellington can enjoy the grandeur of the town's industrial past. In the meantime, well, it's good to know that Claire and others are giving real thought to what kind of future it could have.
If we look at the harsh realities of a project such as this, with so many buildings in such a state of decay, if we did use the idea of curated decay in some key areas, which could perhaps enable small gardens or wildlife areas to be within the core of the whole site, which have multiple benefits for everybody and wildlife, it also allows us to target funds, which are incredibly difficult to find, on buildings which could then be put adaptive reuse, put into use for the community, a climbing wall in, horticultural use, events, all multiple uses that multiple people can think of and be consulted on, that allows that funding to be targeted. However, curated decay does cost money. It isn't just leaving it.